Well, earlier this week he did it again. Premier Brad Wall of Saskatchewan still dominating the popularity polls with a 67% approval rating from Angus Reid. But he's not joining us to talk about that. He's got other things on his mind. The Premier joins us via FaceTime from Swift Current. Welcome to the program, Premier Wall. Quick thought from you on the temporary foreign workers program. You've got a booming province, so you need a lot of these workers. What's the impact, in your view, of what he did today?
Well, we're concerned. If you went to saskjobs.ca today, Don, that's a website that has job listings for the province of Saskatchewan from the private sector principally. There's public sector jobs on it as well. There's 14,982 jobs unfilled. In our economy, a province of 1.1 million people, that's a very significant number. We have a labor shortage here. And so, first and foremost, we agree that Canadians have to have the first crack at jobs. That being said, employers need to be able to operate their business. And so, we're just concerned now that the changes on a de facto basis will eliminate this program as a temporary solution. First of all, there's a lot of political problems here, and I understand that. We had some employers that were abusing this thing, which is not acceptable. So we need the program to be enforced in terms of its rules. We need accountability. It's a terribly named program. It's hard to get to rally a lot of people behind the temporary foreign workers program. But the bottom line is that in our province, 50% of temporary residents, temporary foreign workers, become permanent residents. This is the rest of the story. We've had over 7,000 people in the last 4 years move from temporary foreign worker status to full-time to residence, to permanent residency. So it's an important part of it's a very important part of the mix here, and on a de facto basis, this program is now no longer available, even though the government will say, look, regions like the West where the economy is strong, it is, but there's other changes in there that'll make this very difficult on the employers to manage what is a labor shortage today.
Bring it down to street level. What's going to be the impact on some of these businesses and enterprises, particularly in the hospitality sector, I guess? What's going to be the impact in Saskatchewan, and Regina and Saskatoon and others?
Well, for example, they've said, look, if your unemployment rate's under 6%, and we're fortunate right now, we have about a 4% unemployment rate, so we're well below that. If it's under the 6%, the government is saying you can continue with the program in that hospitality sector. But they're looking at a median wage of about $21 an hour, which, again, that's what I'm saying on a de facto basis. It basically means the program's unavailable. And I should tell you, Don, that there's this story out there, the narrative that the temporary foreign worker program has driven down salaries in that sector. In our province, salaries, wages in that sector have increased 46%, and in all sectors an average of 38%. We all want to see more of that happening, but average weekly earnings are on the way up. That's not to say that we absolutely have to have a priority on Canadians, but there is a role for this program in an economy that, in the part of Canada where the economy is strong, and we want to continue to contribute to the country as we are economically.
Absolutely. I want to switch topics if I can, Premier. Industry Minister James Moore is doing this national tour to knock down barriers to interprovincial trade. I know Saskatchewan's got sort of an open trade zone with Alberta and BC. Is this the model you think has to be followed nationally, and what's going to be the impact of opening up those borders freely?
We do think that, Don. We think that the New West Partnership, which you've just referenced, we think it's a template for the country. For a Canadian free trade zone, it is more than ironic that we would have freer trade with other nations than we do with some provinces. And even in the New West, we have to make some improvements around wine, for example. There's barriers that still exist. We're going to reduce them, but we have a framework to do that in the New West Partnership. Increasingly, in other parts of the country, Don, we see sort of preferential tendering creeping back into things, and government procurement, and that's sort of the last thing we need. We need to go the other direction. So it's a provincial jurisdiction issue. I appreciate Minister Moore's interest in it, but it'll be a top priority for Saskatchewan as we head to the Premier's meeting this summer. And that this trade piece, this inter-provincial trade issue is front and center, and we can reduce some of the barriers that exist between the provinces. And by the way, there's hope that we can. Early on in my time as Premier, we built on the success of Premier Dewar and former Premier Lord, who've been working on labor mobility, and we have basically, with some improvements needed, to have labor mobility in the country because of that provincial effort. We need to take that same effort to the issue of overall trade and procurement.
quick final question, if I could. Northern Gateway doesn't go anywhere near Saskatchewan, goes the opposite direction. But what's your reaction to the government's green light this week to that?
Well, we support the approval. We support the conditions that are there from an environmental standpoint. There's also the conditions of British Columbia. I hear Enbridge and saying, look, we need to be able to meet those 5 conditions, and that's reasonable. We think if the companies are doing it and not other provinces, not other royalties effectively that are owned by the people in other provinces, we think that's probably the way to go. We've got a bit of a dog in this hunt, though, Don, because the differential in terms of what we could be getting for Canadian oil and what we get for Canadian oil is can cost our province alone up to $300 million a year, because that Western Canadian price is lower than West Texas and certainly lower than the Brent, the international, the world price. Getting our oil to Tidewater, even if it's Alberta oil and not Saskatchewan oil or not Manitoba oil, actually will raise the price for all of us, for Canadian exports. And so I think that's important also just in terms of diversifying our market interest, our trade opportunities to Asia. That's also important for the country as well.
Premier Brad Well, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. Have a good summer.
Don't forget it's game day, Don. We play the Eskimos today.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, earlier